promote posts for people in specific offices. So whether it's an event or a news post that's relevant, say you're putting a news post out for a blood drive in the Boston office. It's not really relevant to folks in, say, the New York office.
They could drive. They could drive.
They could drive. If it was really important, they could drive from Boston to New York. But Chicago, they might need a plane.
And then they might get bumped.
And don't go through O'Hare.
All right, welcome everybody. August 20th, 2025. We are talking about SharePoint audience targeting better practices. Today we have our entire gang. And so let's dive in. We're going to start with what is audience targeting. We'll go through some use cases. We'll talk about is content private and secure and what that means with audience targeting. What can be audience targeted is certainly going to be a quick question you ask once you learn what you can do with it. And then how to actually apply audience targeting. What do users see and how does that work? And then why would you use it? So the benefits, obviously, because that's sort of what our discussion is, but then also there are some drawbacks, and we do have some extra sort of keep in mind topics. All right, so let's get going. Our ever faithful Carrie is going to get us started on audience targeting. I know you use it in a lot of your work. So can you help our audience understand what is audience targeting?
Yeah, so audience targeting it's actually quite a simple thing. It's just a SharePoint feature that allows you to customize what content is displayed for different groups of people, different groups of users. So it's just an out-of-the-box setting, and it can be used on any site in specific places that we'll talk about, and in any organization, whether that's a large organization or of any maturity level even. But where I've seen it mostly used and where it's more helpful, at least where I've seen it, is in global organizations where there might be several locations or divisions or offices and things like that, where it would make sense to target content for those different groups of people. So that's where it can really help minimize what could potentially be a large amount of content on, say, a homepage or in a navigation, so that site visitors can sort of be presented with what's just relevant to them, right? So it just sort of streamlines that whole process. And how does it work? It's pretty simple as far as how to set it up and the setting itself, but it's essentially using security groups, Microsoft 365 groups and AD groups to assign what groups can see what content. So it's leveraging those existing groups as part of how it works. And site owners can enable audience targeting on both the web parts and the containers that the content is in. So the web parts that are displaying the content, as well as the containers that are holding that content. And so they can, enable those settings on those different places and then go in and assign an audience to those specific items. So if it's pages in a library, you can assign which pages are going to be visible to which groups, documents the same way, as well as events. So essentially, it's just generally how it works, using and leveraging those groups to assign content to those different groups.
Cool. And it's good to understand that it's not just the built-in security groups for SharePoint, which is what it would have been when we had audience targeting in the old days. It also can be those Microsoft 365 groups, and it says Azure Active Directory dynamic groups, that also known as Entra ID dynamic groups. And those dynamic groups we've talked about in previous episodes, but that's where you can use properties of someone's profile in Entra ID to create a group because of a property, like everyone with the department blah or whatever it might be. So there are lots of ways we can use those security groups. So this means if you want to use this audience targeting, you absolutely have to bake cookies for your IT person so that you know that you have the right security groups available to you. All right, moving on. Derek, you're going to talk about some use cases.
Yeah. So we do use this quite frequently with our intranet builds. Some of the more common use cases that we have are to hide navigation elements. So in either your hub navigation or your site navigation, we would hide different navigation elements based on whether or not you're in their group. Some of the things that we do there would be, say, to maybe create a link to the SharePoint team, the internal collaboration team for folks. If you're in the HR team, then you have a link to the HR team site, right? But you could also do things like create a manager's resources, for instance, and do that inside the quick links, right? And so then if you're in the managers group, or you would see the link for manager resources, and if not, then you wouldn't. Some other things, you can actually promote posts for people in specific offices. So whether it's an event or a news post that's relevant, say you're putting a news post out for a blood drive in the Boston office. It's not really relevant to folks in, say, the New York office. So you can do that.
They could drive. They could drive.
They
to
could
Boston.
drive. If it was really important, they could drive from Boston to New York. But Chicago, they might need a plane.
And then they might get bumped.
And
don't
don't
go
go
with
through
time.
O'Hare.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't have a
choice.
choice.
Fly out of
I have to
Midway.
go through O'Hare.
We got a couple questions in the chat. Castor made the point, and I think it is probably a good point, that it makes it tricky to test and document a solution. I mean, that's valid, right? You can't be, as the editor of the page, or whatever your audience targeting, you can't be in all the groups. And if you're in all the groups, then you're really not telling what's what. So it does make it hard to test. But there's trust but verify. I suppose you could have power users in the different groups verify if you are working or whatever. So that's valid. There's another question from Sean, but you still can't use SharePoint permission groups, correct? And that is not my understanding, but maybe that has changed.
You cannot
Okay, so
use
you
SharePoint.
can't.
SharePoint groups are only for a site, and they don't have a broader scope. Only groups that have that broader scope are so-called modern groups, are the ones that you can use for audience targeting. And it's the people picker. If it shows up in the people picker, you can use it.
Yeah, from the on-prem days, the thing I always told IT folks is if it had a SID, you could do an audience to it. So a user, an AD group, those kind of things. It had to have a SID.
All right, cool. Well, I was wrong. That's why I do not
So
do
no
out of the
no
box.
SharePoint groups.
No SharePoint
No
groups.
SharePoint groups. All right. All right, so let's move on. Carrie, is that content then private and secure? Did we just add security because we added audience targeting?
Short answer, no. The audience targeted content is not private by way of you targeting it, right? It's only private if you've made it such with permissions. So targeting controls the visibility of that content and not really the access. So it's important to know that it isn't secure because you've done something on the homepage to hide something or promote something. It's essentially more about personalizing and customizing what people see based on their group membership, and really like access and all those things are really still controlled by permission. So definitely important to note that. And it's still searchable. So like if someone searches for a document, for an example, in the search box and they have access to that document, they're going to find it in their search results, whether you've hidden that link in the navigation or targeted it on the homepage in some way. So all that still holds true. Same goes for if you have a direct URL to a page or something like that. If you have access to that, you're going to be able to get there. So permissions are still the way to manage security for that.
I definitely think it's an important thing to point out that this is not security, although it kind of implied, like for the newly initiated, I could see that audience targeting would imply security when it has nothing to do with its security. So it's definitely a good thing to point out.
Yeah.
All right. So what can be audience targeted? We've got a nice list of things here.
Yeah, so there's specific components in SharePoint that support audience targeting. And navigation links is the first one here. And that's honestly the one I've used probably the most. And it's more so just to hide things. But you can target nav links in both hub nav and local site nav. It doesn't really matter. One thing I would mention, though, is that when targeting navigation links, each item and each level in that hierarchy can be targeted separately and individually. And so this came up recently on a project I was on where I thought I could just target that middle level in the mega menu, and sort of everything underneath it would also be targeted based on that. Because when you're in navigation, if you remove a middle level, it takes all the nested sublinks with it. It's not how targeting works. It doesn't cascade down. So you really do have to target each
you muted yourself, Carrie.
Each individual link you have to target, which was such a bummer because I had a ton of links and I thought, oh, I'll just be smart and move them into this one bucket and then hide them, but not the case. So, you really do have to do each one separately. But I think it's purposefully done, and it's by design, because it gives you the flexibility to show a heading, say in your level 2 mega menu, and maybe only target 2 of those 5 links that are under it. So it really does give you the ability to sort of pick and choose what you're showing and who you're showing it to. So that was a little bit of an eye opener. You can also target.
What if you disable like a sublink that has links under it? What is even going to show up if you audience? How does it?
Yeah, I think it's probably intended to be, let's show the header as our second level and those specific links that we target. But you're right. If you didn't want to show anything, let's say you didn't want to show that manager section in the middle there, you could then target that second level and all the links in the third level. But yes, it's a little bit quirky in that you can kind of do both.
Or you can do the top level, I think, and then nothing drops down because the top level isn't even there.
Is invisible. Yeah.
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 But Julie, if you built it, you might not have done it this way.
I would not. Well, let's start with A. Julie doesn't build things in SharePoint. Let's start there.
It was quirky, and depending on if you're in the groups, it's hard to test, like we've already talked about, right? It's hard to really know what folks are seeing. So.
Absolutely, Krista and Glenna shared some of their ideas in the chat, so that's good if you're paying attention. Anyway, I will let you keep going and stop interrupting. Go ahead.
Sure. And so pages are another place where you can audience target specific pages, and you do so in the site pages library. So you'd activate it there and then select an audience for various pages. Same goes for document libraries and lists. So you enable it on those containers. And then I believe the primary use for that is more so for the highlighted content web part. So if you're targeting things in those places where it can dynamically roll up, it will respect that targeting. And then here's a list of the web parts that you can turn this targeting on in the web parts themselves. And so it's news, where you can sort of push news to different audiences, like we just mentioned, highlighted content. Quick links, which is more of those individual links that you want to sort of show for different people. Events, things that are based for different offices. And then the Viva Connections dashboard cards can also be another area where you might find this useful for certain groups or roles of people in different organizations.
Yeah. And one thing about at least the Viva Connections dashboard, the ACEs, the adaptive card extensions, those can be audience targeted per card. So it's not a one and done, like it's not the entire dashboard, it's each individual card on the dashboard can be audience targeted to a different group.
Yeah. And it's important to know that because we're still in the early stages of that. Not that I know that it's going to change, but there was talk one day of allowing multiple dashboards in a site, and that doesn't exist yet. But
yeah,
audience targeting the dashboard itself is like turn it on or turn it off. Whereas going in, it's sort of the nav sort of conversation, right? It's like, do you want like the whole thing gone, or do you just want an audience target the things inside?
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
Good distinction.
Yeah, and now that you can have dashboards on multiple sites, you can have different dashboards, say on your sales site or your marketing site, and then audience target, say, different things per region, using the dynamic groups. So.
Right. We're just not to the point where you can have multiple dashboard pages in one site. So then you can have multiple.
Correct.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that was discussed. So I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. All right, let's move on. Patrick, so how do we do it? Now that we know what we want to do, how do we do it?
Yeah, we're going to go over just a few ways to turn this on and how to do it. But the first thing I just want to jump into is, while most of the web parts work similarly in terms of how you turn them on and add groups, there are a few differences that we just wanted to point out. Those being, as Carrie noted, the document libraries, lists, and actually the events web part. Because that is a list on the back end, you actually have to turn on audience targeting in the lists and the libraries themselves, as opposed to the web part. So you have to turn it on there, and then you can apply it to the web part. But for most of the web parts, here we're showing a quick links. You go into edit mode on your page. You first select the web part that you want to go to, select the filter section, and toggle on to enable audience targeting. So that's the left image here. So that turns on audience targeting for that web part. If you have a list of, or say 3 links under your quick links, but you only want to target one, you actually have to go into that item. So you go into the item in the toolbox, again, go to the filter section and enter the audiences you want to target.
Okay, cool.
So most of the web parts will work that way.
Nice.
Yeah, so you sort of turn it on the container, and then you target the individual items within it.
Cool. All right, and so slightly different for navigation. Well, similar,
slightly different, similar, but just wanted to show how it looks different. I think similar to Carrie, navigation tends to be the spot that I've used the most as also quick links, but you go and edit your navigation. You go to enable site navigation audience targeting and toggle that on. Then when you add or select one of the items you want to audience target that you've already added to your navigation, you can see that you have audiences to target, and that's where you put in your groups there. Once you hit OK, while you're in edit mode, any site owner or site member would see this cute little icon of 2 little people. That's how you know that that link is then audience targeted. That does not show up once you save. That is only while you're in edit mode and only visible to those who would potentially alter the page.
Cool.
Or the navigation.
All right, so then pages.
So similarly to lists and libraries, pages you can actually audience target too. So say you had a group for project managers or for the C-suite or something like that. You can audience target those pages. You do have to do it a little differently. So you have to go to the site pages library, select the ellipsis for the page that you want to select, go to settings and audience targeting. And then you can select from a group that adds a column to the page, and then you can select a group from the audience column to target. So it's a little different when you're doing a site page than it is for other areas, but it is good to know that you can target certain pages if needed.
Cool.
Yeah, and if nothing's there, it's visible to everybody. So just keep that in mind too.
Excellent. All right. And then what do users see when they're not in edit mode, I guess?
So of course, this is the big question. What does this look like for the average user? So when a user doesn't have access to a link, so they are not part of this targeted group, they would just see the 3 items on the left for important tasks: some Praxis, an Excel worksheet, my PDF. But say you do have access. So Carrie has been tagged as part of the special group. So all of a sudden you notice that there's a 4th item on the same list. When you have permission, you can see me.
Yep.
So that's just kind of how that shows up and what the difference is between your users about whether they're part of a targeted group or not.
Yeah, I think this is maybe where you can, with uneducated users, you can end up with a help desk scenario here. Like, oh, you know, Lori in HR says to Janie in HR, hey, you just clicked that 4th link. It's called blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, Lori's targeted, but Janie's not. And they're like, oh, I don't have the link. And, you know, and now help desk has to get involved. So I think to your guys' point, when you're doing this type of stuff, you're being really thoughtful about how you're targeting. But I think there's an education step here that needs to be happening so that your users understand that things can be targeted to them. And so, if somebody else doesn't see it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bug. It meant they weren't supposed to see it. So
that's sort of a basic problem in SharePoint, though. I mean, different people can go to the same page and see different stuff because of their permissions. So
that too.
Not to confuse permissions with audience targeting, but lots of times people will see different things on different pages when they're in SharePoint. So I always say, let me see your screen, because I don't always believe
show me
you're not seeing the so when you're trying to support this stuff, you might ask for a screenshot like this, or you might ask to see the screen so that you can say, oh yeah, that's the thing that we have audience targeted, which your help desk folks would need to know about too.
And you hope you're in the group too, so you could see it. That's the other problem.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's an argument here to add sort of like context to the button, like some sort of emoji or some sort of indicator.
Don't tell anyone.
Even the viewer. Yeah, you know what I'm saying though, to the viewer that hey, this thing is audience targeted, because then maybe they know. And ironically, without even knowing I was going to do it, I've segued right into Mark's next slide, which is benefits and drawbacks.
Why, thanks, Julie.
Yeah, I'm here for you, babe.
So there's some very definitely good things about this. It's making sure that people are seeing the stuff that's most relevant to them. And you can also think about it sort of like promoting content to smaller groups of people. You want to have it on the page, but you don't want to have it cluttered up the page for everyone. So targeting communications. You can make your navigation just sort of less cluttered, because if everyone sees all of the links that anyone could possibly go to, that's more links than might be relevant to that person. So you're reducing some of that visual clutter. You've got to have good governance and good group structure and valid group membership. All of this depends on that. Microsoft 365 groups being the primary one that you would use here, and also security groups. You don't add people to groups just because you want to share a document with somebody. You don't add people to groups because it seems like, oh, well, we don't want to exclude them. We don't want them to feel left out. The membership of groups actually matters for stuff like this. So you want to make sure that people understand that you don't just add people to groups for no good reason. And then this last one sort of hits the navigation thing again, but you only want to show people navigation links that they're actually going to be able to reach. So lots of times I see people putting a navigation link with a little lock next to it. That usually is to mean, you may or may not get to this thing. Well, clicking on something and not being able to get to it is frustrating. That isn't a good user experience generally, unless you want to let them ask for access. So rather than doing the lock thing, if only a small group of people is going to see a link, you want to actually hide it so people don't click on it and not get the satisfaction of arriving somewhere. Some of the drawbacks here, and this is not necessarily only a drawback, but this is not permissions. I added that little lock picture on a couple of these slides because I think it's really, really important. This is not permissions. Anything that your audience targeting, like if it's a quick link, you won't ever see that button, but the destination for that quick link is still there for you. I mean, unless you don't have permissions to it. So permissions are the thing that is going to prevent people from seeing things that they should not see. Targeting is more about promoting content to the right people, or people who it's more relevant for. So you just have to sort of get those two concepts separate in your head. Only certain things can be targeted or use audience targeting. We've gone through the web parts and the navigation and the pages and things like that, where you can actually do this. You can't do it everywhere. And in a lot of cases, if you look like at a text web part, would that make sense? Maybe, but I think that they've added it to the web parts where it makes the most sense. Maintenance can be more complex. That's probably most of the conversation in the chat. Everybody has their own tricks to sort of deal with it. A service account with only the admins in it, that can be a way to make it a little bit easier to be able to see everything that's on the screen for everyone. And then potential for confusion, which we've already talked about a little bit. I think again, if you use this judiciously, the drawbacks become benefits, right? You're actually removing a lot of clutter. You're giving people better sort of a better canvas to operate in, and they're going to, I think, appreciate the fact that it's not as cluttered.
Mark,
Cool.
just to that, the bullet about the using the lock icon. So you mentioned like having that good structure, like having good group strategy and having the group set up. I working with someone where they don't really have that, and so they've opted to put the little icon just as a way to kind of alert folks that you may or may not, like you said, get somewhere, which you know, it's better than not knowing, I guess, at all. But yeah, but they kind of go together. It's like you want to make sure you do have that good group strategy to be able to use it, and because of that, they're actually deciding not to use it in a lot of places. So
yeah, I think back in the days when Active Directory groups, and they were called that back then, were the driving force, and everyone would say, well, IT doesn't keep those up to date. You know, they could blame it on someone else. With Microsoft 365 groups, the owner of that group manages that. So the responsibility comes closer, and if you stick to that responsibility, then you can get this benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
And you gotta love adding somebody as a group owner just because they're the manager, but actually have no idea what that group does, but they're an owner. So yeah,
the owner should be somebody who's actually going to play that role and do the things that they need to do. So
but
keep
I'm
in
the
mind,
manager. I need to be the owner of this group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vice president. That's an owner.
Yeah.
Delegation is a very important skill. So a few things to keep in mind. Lots of times, if you haven't published the thing that you're working with this audience targeting stuff, it's not what people see. So just make sure that you've published after you've made a change like this. It shoots us all in the foot every once in a while. Well, no, you shouldn't be seeing that. And then you hadn't pushed the publish button. There are other things that come into play here. Just because you audience target something so that a group of people can see the, like quick link, for example, that doesn't mean that the destination of that button is available to that person. You really need to make sure you're using these two things in concert. When this happens a lot, where especially if you're doing a demo, it happens every time you're doing a demo. You know, you create a new group and you say, okay, cool, now let's go audience target to this group, and the group isn't available yet because reasons. Sometimes there are lags in a lot of this stuff. So having a known group topology in place ahead of time is really sort of, you know, where you want to be before you start thinking about audience targeting. It's an aspect of IA that's probably not thought about too much. Yeah, how your groups are set up and who's in them, and all of that is part of your information architecture. And then, you know, governance for managing and troubleshooting issues with audience targeting is no different than doing the same thing for permissions. You know, sometimes people see stuff and other people don't, and you need to be able to debug or at least solve that problem when it arises. So just be prepared for that. Make sure your help desk people know that you're starting to use this, and it might be something that comes up. Cool. We've got a few little other additional ways to target. We should go through these quickly. We're getting towards the end, but anybody want to comment on any of these? Anyone? Well, these are different than using the term audience targeting. It's not, you won't see those two words on the screen, I don't think, for each of these, but these are other places where you can start to think about who can see what stuff and why. And you know, it's always better if something, I think Derek's example was a great one, except I can drive to Boston from New York. But if you're doing a blood drive in an office, you know, it's just irrelevant to everyone else. So don't show it to everyone else. So that's the kind of thing you want to be thinking about. So there are things like, for example, and this not even on this list, but who can associate sites with hub sites can be limited to a specific set of groups. So
Yes, it
some of
can.
them are they're a little bit more sort of administrative or sort of behind the scenes things, but you want to make sure that when you see the ability to do things like that when you're setting something up, that you sort of research, well, what, how can this help me out so that I'm not annoying people with stuff that's not relevant.
Yeah.
And these are other
That's an
things you
awesome
might want to
set of
take a look
lists.
at. Yep.
All right, well, let's move on since we are right at time. We got some resources for you. They are clickable and they will be obviously in our show notes. And then to just address what's happening, September 3rd is our next episode. We decided we're going to go back into SharePoint page analytics. There's some new things coming. They are licensed things, so you do need advanced licensing to do them, but it felt like a good time to just go over page analytics again, what you have, and then what these new things are that are coming and what that licensing is. See us live. Mark and I will be at Expert Live in New York City. That's October 10th. And then right after that, Collab Days New England. Yeah, everybody that is in the New England area, please join us for that. Registration is open right now. And Patrick and Todd are going to be presenting there, which is wonderful. And then Mark and I will be at TechCon 365 in Dallas in November. So $100 off. We've got that some practice code that just dropped. So if you would like to see us in Dallas or come to that conference and want $100 off, well, there's the code for you. Anyway, that's all we got for this week. Thanks everybody for coming. As usual, we appreciate you and we appreciate the conversation in the chat. Obviously, you can keep that going now that you're here, and I will post the live YouTube video as soon as it's up. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Some Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.